through Les Bleus' opening 2-1 Group C win over Australia from earlier this afternoon. So, chaps, we'll dive right in. Unconvincing in a number of areas, Eric, but a win nonetheless. How did you see it?
I think you've encapsulated it pretty well there. Yeah, France, I think that, we've seen how this 4-3-3 can be successful for France, but I think that the personnel that Deschamps used was poor, and we had some unexpectedly poor performances from some certain players. I think according to Tolisso, is a shadow of his usual self today. That was certainly culpable. I think that Deschamps was looking for more from him going forward. He's certainly a more dynamic and attacking option than his competition in that spot, which would have been Blaise Matuidi. And I think that lacking that made the midfield a little bit too stodgy, and I think that it served to have a lack of connection. I think the only link we saw with midfield and attack were really balls over the top from Pogba, and it really robbed France of a lot of the dynamism we would have expected them to have, given just how attacking a lineup Deschamps put out earlier today.
Yeah, interesting. It was the stodginess midfield really sort of got to me as well. That sort of really stuck out. Are you on the same page here, Jez? Some credit to Australia, though, no?
Yeah, Australia definitely deserved credit. It was a great performance, but I mean, France started sort of the first. I think they had 4 shots on target, 3 of them sort of very easy saves, but still 4 shots on target in the first 8 minutes, and it looked like they were going to overwhelm Australia. And then they just sort of allowed Australia not only to get a foothold in the game, but arguably to get the upper hand. And I think there's a few factors at play. France do have a pretty poor record in opening matches, particularly in the World Cup, but arguably in the Euros as well. The only one that I can think of in recent memory that was an actual decent win was Denmark in 2000, but that 2000 team, I think, bestrode all other French ones, even 98. And even the 98 one, which was a 3-0 win, was not a particularly convincing one. So I think the main thing is just to get the win out of the way. I think, only 9 of the squad have been in a major tournament before, so that's quite a big difference. Or certainly only 9 were in the last Euros anyway. I suppose Varane was in the previous World Cup, but so it's still a relatively green squad. So certainly, like for example with Tolisso, I agree that there was not enough link between midfield and attack. Certainly not enough quick transitions from defence to attack, and I guess I'd be inclined to put the blame on Tolisso, but I don't want to use that word because I think maybe just the occasion got to him as it did to a couple of other players this year. I certainly wouldn't. I'd still stick with him because I still think he's a class act and better at that kind of thing than Matuidi is nowadays, and certainly an all-round better player. But that was certainly one of the issues, and I think the other issue was the attack in general. One day, France's defence and midfield and attack will all play well together, and then they'll be frightening. It was ironic that Umtiti's handball aside, it was actually a really good defensive performance for once.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be good to focus in on that sort of defensive performance first of all, because there are a lot of issues to arise from the selection. Obviously, Mendy and Sidibe were, Mendy's obviously returning from injury and not 100% fit, and he showed that sort of lack of fitness over the last few games, and Sidibe struggling with an injury as well. But Eric, how did you see the sort of almost stand-in fullbacks in Hernandez and Pavard's performances? Because I felt that with France being so narrow in attack, that the width usually provided by Mendy and Sidibe wasn't really evident, and that kind of hamstrung France a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with each of that front three, looking to cut inside, and we're used to more width from France. I think that is true, but at the same time, you're dealing with Kroos and the other winger for Australia. Anyway, you're dealing with 2 very pacey wingers.
Is it Leckie? Matthew Leckie?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes. You're dealing with 2 very pacey wingers. So not only are these players a little bit more prosaic by nature, but I think that perhaps awareness of Australia playing on the counter through these wide players would have given them cause to sit back a little bit more and be a little bit more, if not negative, a little bit more cautious in their approach. And that was really good. I mean, this is the thing that, France, for all their talent and attack, there have been some question marks in defense. I mean, certainly Varane and Umtiti didn't have the most shining set of friendlies. even going back to the March friendlies as well, there were some issues in defense. People were suggesting TT was tired after a long season, and I think that yes, again, penalty aside, I think that it was a really solid display, particularly from those fullbacks, and then I think that sense of gravity and solidity will give them a lot of confidence going forward, and that's something that they're going to need to call upon. I was mentioning with Jeremy on air before we came on air that Peru looked really, really dangerous. That's not going to be an easy match for France. It's one I could see France losing, but to have that, again, not a clean sheet, but to have a really solid defensive performance in their pocket for those young fullbacks, especially, I believe they're both 22. I think is really going to provide a lot of encouragement for that back four as a unit, and for those fullbacks in particular.
I think it's a really interesting point because they were definitely defensively solid. But Des, do you think for this sort of game, I 100% see what Eric's saying, but we knew Australia would be compact and sit in, and they were very, very narrow and two banks of four, the classic, defensive sort of unit. Should Deschamps be thinking a little bit more sort of proactively in this sort of situation? And he may not have had too much of an option in playing Pavard and Hernandez, but should Deschamps have sort of more solutions to breaking that sort of team down, given the way he's set up?
I mean, in terms of the fullbacks, I just think, firstly, you've got to treat pretty much any opponent you meet in the World Cup with respect. And Australia really aren't such a bad team. And secondly, the most crucial thing is not to lose your opening match, and you're really struggling. Particularly as on paper, it's the easiest match of the three. I think that, I mean, I might be old-fashioned, but for me, the number one job of the fullbacks should still be to defend, and then any sort of attacking support you get as a bonus. And irrespective of the injuries, I think Pavard absolutely is a better defender than Sidibe, and I think probably Hernandez is a better one than Mendy as well. The fact that I think they're both very good going forward generally is as I said, sort of more than a bonus, but a real help. I just think that, I mean, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about the attack, but my worry about that three-man attack always is that particularly Mbappe and Dembele just do practically nothing ever to help the defence. And so I think that if you're playing those three in attack, even though you're clearly setting your stall out to be an attacking team, you have to make sure that you've got some sort of defensive cover there. Considering you're not going to get that from those I was going to say those two wide players. I suppose on paper Griezmann's the wider, supposed to be the one on the wide right, but if you're not going to get enough defensive support from the attack when you lose the ball, then I think the crucial thing is to make sure that the firstly, that the fullbacks are proper defenders, and secondly, that they're not going to be too adventurous and get caught out of position. It's not the ideal, and I think just generally, I think France were sort of torn. I think they set out their sort of excellent counter-attacking team, but in a match in which they were supposed to have all the possession, so it was kind of a little bit contradictory, and I think they just generally didn't know whether to sort of stick or twist. But in terms of the fullbacks, I mean, generally, I thought they had a really good game, Hernandez in particular. And I'm not going to put any sort of attacking deficiencies today on them, because I don't think that should be their number one role.
Yeah, I think that's a really sort of relevant point. I think they were really solid defensively, and the keep seemed to agree, giving them sort of 5 and 6 out of 10, which is relatively solid for very notoriously harsh markers. The front three, on the other hand, got 3 out of 10 each, which perhaps is a little bit harsh and perhaps characteristically harsh of the keep. But I think, picking up on something Jez said there, Eric, that it didn't look as though France knew whether to stick or twist. Is that a fault of the coaching? Because it did feel like that this counter-attacking more counter-attacking style of selection, the fact that there's pace in Dembele and Mbappe and Griezmann to some extent as well, would suit a better side that are going to give them space. Was there not a case for Olivier Giroud to start, even though he might not be first choice going forward? Dembele might play other games that are more suited to him. But is it the mistake of Deschamps that France looks so stodgy? Because they could have kind of played into Australia's hands a little bit.
Well, again, yeah. I mean, Australia were playing narrow. They were playing compact. We could see those 2 banks of 4, or even 5 at times. And given that, if you have players who are trying to do something with the ball with their feet, trying to cut inside, as each of Griezmann, Mbappe, and Dembele like to play, I think that without someone to create hold-up play, whether it's Giroud or someone who's more of a natural winger, that maybe could be Lamar at some point. I know he's not been in the best of form for Monaco, and he's had certainly his issues, but I think having a lack of genuine width in that team, were Kingsley Coman to have had a better season, that could have been an option as well. I think it was a rather baffling selection. I know that they can do individual things differently, but I think that the similarities among Griezmann, Mbappe, and Dembele, for me, made it too difficult to try and establish a sort of rapport and a sort of rhythm. And also Dembele, and if we're looking at him as a player who, given his injury history over the past 18 months or so, hasn't had as much experience with this French side as you might have liked. I mean, that position might have been taken up by Lamar in the recent past, or by Giroud with Mbappe playing wide. And I think that to ask these players to play sort of slightly unfamiliar roles in a match of this magnitude, when you know that Australia are going to be deep, they're going to be compact, they're going to be negative, I think is very problematic for Deschamps. I think that he should have opted for more familiarity and started Giroud, and used Griezmann and Mbappe wide and left Dembele on the bench as someone who could have affected the game as a substitute. Because if you look, really, I think that it was troubling to me, looking at the substitution pattern, that with a match still level, his option was to bring on Blaise Matuidi. I mean, I don't think I need to say more about that, but not to have more genuine attacking options that he felt he could trust in reserve, I think also was a mistake on Deschamps' part. He had Thauvin, he had Lamar on the bench as well, but so I think that starting Giroud and having Griezmann and Mbappe play more as, again, they're never going to be orthodox wingers, but play in a more natural wide setting would have made France more effective in this particular setting.
I sort of back up a lot. Go. Sorry, no, I was going to say I back up a lot of that. I think I wonder if Deschamps did sort of bow to public pressure to go with a sort of quicker, smaller, speedier attack. But if he did that, I know people are going to start thinking that I've got something against Dembele. I really don't. I mean, he's a fantastic, exciting player, but I don't think a front three suits him. I know he's sort of starting to adapt to that for Barcelona, but to me, at this stage of his career and the kind of player he is, I still think that he's best and less of a liability as an out-and-out winger. And I'd probably use him be more likely to use him in a 4-4-2 with maybe Giroud and Griezmann together in the middle. If I was going to play three up front, I'd have gone for the Naut of Fekir behind. And I'm happy with Mbappe and Griezmann. I think they're probably undroppable, and fair enough, however bad Griezmann in particular was today. Although I think I read that he got the official man of the match award, which was ridiculous. But
how have you done that? That's bizarre.
I mean, the penalty was well taken, but yeah.
Yeah.
I get that. Against sort of what you sort of think of as a kind of standard, rugged, defensive, big back four that you kind of associate with Australia. I get that you can go either way. Either you have someone like Giroud, who's sort of the sort of big bulky forwards who can really sort of mix it up with them, or you go for the sort of smaller, speedy versions. Didier Roustan described it as, to combat a forest, you need to have little trolls, but he meant it in a complimentary way. So I understand that. I just think that the personnel that he picked, a little bit the personnel that he picked wasn't the right personnel. Also, bottom line is Griezmann and Mbappe just didn't have good games. There's an element of that as well. There's only a certain amount. I know a lot of people really like to kick Deschamps, but there's only a certain amount he can do. And when your best players and the two players that no one disputes should be in the team just don't turn up, then there's only so much that Deschamps can do once the players cross the line.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a sort of a point that's often forgotten. Once they have crossed that line, there's little that he can do to affect their direct performance. So just thinking about what we've already discussed, chaps, how do we line up against Peru in the second game on Thursday? Do we stick with this sort of narrow 4-3-3, sort of diamond-ish false nine hybrid, or does Deschamps switch? Does he go with a little more sort of like in the qualifying when we had the 4-4-2, a little bit more familiar, even if it means restricting Mbappe a little bit? Do you think, Eric, that he'll stick or twist?
I think that we should look at a 4-3-3 with Dembele being dropped. I can see a case for a diamond, but I think that could pose problems because you would probably be more likely to drop Tolisso for Matuidi were that to be the case. I think that Deschamps would have seen the match today between Peru and Denmark and be a little bit more wary about how aggressive this Peru side is, and perhaps want a little bit more defensive work rate in midfield, which could see France being a little bit negative. So that's what I would do. 4-3-3 with Giroud and for Dembele. Have him be that physical center of play and allow Griezmann and Mbappe to have a bit more freedom in their roles, but also knowing the solidity that you have with Pavard and Hernandez, that their defensive work rates aren't going to necessarily detract from what we have. And Peru do have pretty attacking fullbacks. So I think a 4-4-2 diamond would leave France a little bit too exposed if they were to play that narrowly.
Would you agree there, Jez? How would you go for the Peru game?
I genuinely can't decide. I just think every formation has got pros and cons. A lot of it, I think a lot of the media sort of having a go at Deschamps for being stuck in his ways, then having a go at him for being too reactionary. But I think that a lot of the media is being too reactionary as well. Giroud has one bad game, immediately should be dropped. Today didn't work out. Immediately he needs to change the system, bring Giroud back. A similar thing, I think Giroud's aggressivity will help against a good defense, but at the same time, it's not just what he gives going forward. And by the way, especially today, let's stop with the Giroud isn't technically good enough to play with those other two strikers. He set up the winner with a nice touch, which he often shows. But I think he also will help. He's not the quickest, but he will help press. He will always work hard and be the sort of first line of defence when France lose the ball. In terms of the midfield, I don't know if I'd be happy with a 4-3-3, but I'd be happy with a 4-4-2 with Diamond as well. I just hope Tolisso sort of, now this match is over, he'll relax and play the way that he did in the friendlies, because I think he can give more both defensively and in the attack. And yeah, for me, definitely no Dembele. I think he could be. I think it's a double win because I think he can be a bit too much of a liability. I think he lost the ball 14 times today. That's just far too many at this level, I think. So I think he could be a liability, but at the same time, he can be frightening as a substitute. And Peru, I thought they looked fantastic today. And I mean, fantastic as a neutral going forward. They're a bit unlucky to lose, but certainly at times they look so open that I think Dembele could really cause havoc coming on late to have a run at them. But I wouldn't start with him. I mean, I'd be happy with Lemar on a wing. Until today, I thought Mbappe probably should be down the middle and Griezmann's adaptable enough to play on the right. Now I think probably it does need to be the other way around. I think although it might take a little bit away from Mbappe, I think Griezmann is better in the middle, and Mbappe can still play well slightly on one side. So I would change it up by removing Dembele and either putting Lemar on the other wing, or I know I've said it already and I've been fishing for it a bit recently, but I think he did well when he came on today. I like the idea of Fekir behind Mbappe and Griezmann.
Yeah, I think that Oh, sorry, Jeremy. Go ahead.
No, that was it. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that Fekir, if you don't have Giroud on the pitch, I think that he has also a degree of physical solidity. He doesn't necessarily offer hold-up play, but he can retain the ball and link play a lot better than any of those other players can. I mean, they're all fantastic on their day, but they're not as suited to taking kicks as we see Fekir do week in and week out in Ligue 1.
I mean, when he came on, he had a few runs. They didn't all work out, but I thought at least there was someone trying. He looked more comfortable immediately than any of the front three did for the previous 60, 70 minutes, whatever it was. I don't know if that's just because he's full of confidence at the moment, or I think he's more comfortable with the ball at his feet. The others are, well, it's not like Griezmann's more comfortable with the flicks, but if you're having one of those days where it's just not working out, then the flicks none of them come off and it looks awful. Mbappe and Dembele can dribble with it, but Dembele, I think, is just a bit wild, and Mbappe, I think, if he's coming back to dribble, then you're sort of taking away his more potent weapons further forward. So I think having Fekir back, and you don't know if he's going to dribble with it, you don't know if he's going to slip a ball through, which I think they could have done with against a solid defence today. I just think that gives a slightly different angle and a different thing for teams to think about.
Yeah, I think I would have to be on board with the Fekir opinion in that I quite like the idea of Fekir starting behind Griezmann and Mbappe. The only thing is, I think it's the type of formation that perhaps, given the personnel, and that Deschamps should have been trying and implementing a year ago, and not in the 3 friendlies building up to the World Cup, having played either in a 4-3-3 or a 4-4-2 for pretty much the entirety of the time since the Euros. And although I think that gets the best out of a lot of France's players, especially if they do want to go a bit gung-ho and maybe in contradiction to what we've already talked about with Pavard and Hernandez, and go with the sort of the Monaco sort of setup a little bit with the fullbacks, buy into that and say, we've got so many attacking players, we've got so much speed that we're going to attack, and we might be a little bit open, but we're going to score more than you effectively. It'd be really interesting to see that sort of play out, but I just don't think they've had enough time to sort of work out how that formation works for this team, and they haven't got any time to sort of build that cohesion. And I'm amazed that, given that it wasn't really, because it's been this sort of very narrow sort of 3 at front, and Griezmann's kind of been dropping back, and Fekir played at the tip of a diamond in one of the friendlies. It just felt like that was such a sort of rash sort of decision to switch to it so late, and I would have liked them to do that. I think it's a good idea, but Deschamps done it far too late for me, and he kind of has to stick to his guns and play with the formation and a setup that these players know as a group, and I'm not sure that they're accustomed to playing the way that he's got them playing now, which was partly the issue with being so stodgy. I think Australia were good as well, but it was partly the issue this afternoon. It'd be interesting to see, and I think both of you guys make some really interesting points about how he might switch up the formations, but a really good point was made to me today, actually, and it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on it, that over the course of sort of Deschamps' career, could you really pinpoint his philosophy? Is he a manager that you say, yes, Deschamps plays this way, this is what Deschamps is trying to do, these are Deschamps' ideals, I know what he wants his teams to play like, I know what a Deschamps team plays like? Are France suffering from the fact that Deschamps doesn't really have a clear direction? Eric, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that he's most associated with 4-3-3, clearly. But then you look at his greatest success, the Euros of 2 years ago, and he achieved that playing at 4-4-2. I think that he's someone who, I don't know whether it's lacking confidence or that he's, as we rightly mentioned, too easily swayed by the media or the itinerant form of players from match to match, from season to season. But yeah, I think that lack of identity means that players have confusion about their roles. And I think we talk about Tolisso. Again, I think we can all agree he's a fantastic player, but I think that perhaps there was some confusion for him. Is he being more of a sentry, and is he supposed to aid Conte more, or is he supposed to facilitate the attack more in concert with and perhaps even playing ahead of Paul Pogba? I think that there was some confusion about his role today, and I think that that, in addition to this being his first experience of this level with France, perhaps unduly negatively influenced him. I think that this sort of lack of consistency from Deschamps, it not only serves to, if not unsettle the players, give them a way of unfamiliarity that, let's face it, playing international football versus playing club football means there's already an artificially low level of familiarity in the way that these players relate to each other. But continuing to change systems, continuing to ask these players to play in slightly different roles means that's going to be exponentially more difficult for these players to necessarily reach the heights that we see from them on club form. And I think that we saw that with Tolisso today, and perhaps we could lay, again, some of the blame for the performances of Mbappe and Griezmann for that today, and that they were playing, again, yet another role, not necessarily wholly unfamiliar, but certainly one in which they perhaps hadn't had the time to establish a rapport, dialogue, understanding of space and movement. Dembele as well, that would cause that attack, despite the manifest talent within it, to suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely a really sort of interesting point. I very much agree with that. There's a lack of identity. Is that something France are in need of? An identity, a clear identity?
I'm really torn on this. I think it's come up a lot, and I can't decide. I mean, people say, "Oh, you know how Germany are going to play, you know how Spain are going to play, you know how Brazil are going to play." First of all, I'm not 100% sure that's true of Germany. Brazil will play gung ho, and it will often catch up with them. Spain, you know how they're going to play, but that's because they've got a ridiculously gifted set of very small, skillful attacking midfielders. So they kind of have that decision made for them, I think. I don't mind. First of all, in terms of Deschamps, he's a defensive midfielder, and by nature he's a more defensive coach. And I think, in a way, maybe he's sort of done a disservice by the fact that he's coaching this France team because their strength is in attack rather than in defence. But at the same time, he wants to make sure that they're a defensively solid team, and any successful team is. Not any successful team, that's not right, but most successful teams are built on a strong defence. So I do understand where he's coming from and sort of erring towards that side. And I really don't mind his tactical flexibility, which I think it worked very well at the Euros and has worked well at times since. It's literally only in the recent friendly matches and today that I felt a little bit like it's sort of chopping and changing from one match to the other. And everyone should know what the plan A is, and then you can adapt to a plan B according to the opposition or how a match is going. So I agree to a point, but especially because it's a young, relatively inexperienced team, so they'll probably, whether it's their favoured formation or not, at least if they know going into each match that's what they're going to be playing, it might give them one more certainty to sort of grasp onto as they're sort of playing their first World Cup or whatever. But at the same time, I feel like it's not just his thing. There's Griezmann and Mbappe. So Mbappe, he's barely had a career yet, and he's already been shifted all over the place and has shown that he can play in all of them, in all the different positions. Griezmann, I think, as well. So I think that there's, I don't know if fault's the right words, but there's ways to look at it on both sides. And I do understand why people are kind of saying, just what is your favoured formation? But at the same time, when he's kind of stuck with one formation for 2-3 matches and the last one ends in a poor result, suddenly everyone's saying, well, he hasn't got a clue tactically, and he always does the 4-3-3, and he's never willing to change it. So I think sometimes people can be one-eyed just for the sake of having a go at him. So that's why and he captained the France World Cup winning team, so that's why I tend to forgive him almost everything. I know I do it a little bit too much, but I do think he gets a little bit too much stick as well.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was gonna say, thinking back, actually, the match in which Fekir got hurt, actually, they were set to play a 4-3-1-2 in that match. So, I mean, yeah, I take your point that he is perhaps more flexible than people give him credit for. But again, the experimenting with the diamond in the recent friendly, I just there needs to be a level of consistency and focus heading into a major tournament that France have a genuine chance of winning, provided things fall their way. And that to me is frustrating at this point in time, to see that sense of uncertainty. It's not a September friendly, 9 months from major tournament. It's building on the set of players who are at, Griezmann, Pogba, who have a level of experience but are still in the prime of their careers, and to capitalize on this opportunity, and to see that being undone by a sense of uncertainty in terms of players' roles is to me frustrating to see. Despite Deschamps having, obviously a manifest abilities in certain other areas.
Yeah, I think frustration is definitely a common sort of feeling, but I think that we've talked a lot about sort of slightly sort of not negative points, but sort of I think points to sort of consider. It'd be really good to touch on the positives as well, because they have won the game. They don't technically, well, traditionally, sorry, don't start particularly too well. Haven't won too many groups in recent tournaments. So I think we should sort of pick out some positives here. I think Lloris was very good when called upon. Kante was fantastic. So some positives, Jez, from you. Do you see them as silver linings or things to work on?
Yeah, as I said, I think the defence looked more solid than it has for ages. And I mean, penalty aside, because that was handed on a plate to Australia, I think we conceded pretty much from memory one shot. Even that actually came off Tolisso, and it was a fantastic save from Lloris, which was great to see after his recent slightly wayward form. So that was great. Kante, I think, was very good. Although I've heard a couple of people say that he's a little bit wasted as the sort of defensive shield, and the way that he kind of stepped up and kind of started the move for what led to the penalty made me think that a little bit more, and possibly something that Eric touched on. Maybe another thing to look at would be Tolisso as the shield, and giving Kante a little bit more freedom. There's something to think about. I think Pogba. I mean, it's the first time that I can remember for years Pogba having 2 consecutive good games. I thought he looked good and had a part in both. Well, obviously scored, or if you might call it an own goal, but effectively he scored the second goal and he put the pass through to Griezmann for the penalty. So big part to play in both goals. And I just thought he played a lot more. I just think he plays his best when he's playing simply, and I think he did that today. And it might frustrate him, but I think he's better at that than anyone else in the world. So I think they're positives. And Giroud, in a way, he might have not done himself a favour. I think in the Giroud or Dembele debate, I always thought Giroud's better starting and Dembele coming on as a sub, despite Giroud's very good stats as a sub for Arsenal. But the way he came on today and turned the match might be a bit strong, but gave Australia a different thing to think about and set up the winning goal. He's shown that, despite being dropped, which by all accounts he was pretty disappointed with, he's still mentally right and able to bring something to the game, even as a sub. So that's another positive. And I guess bottom line is we won the game, we move on, and now those players who hadn't played a World Cup match before have, but we still got 3 points to show for it. We could be in a much worse situation. So overall, some things to worry about, and it was not a good performance at all. But weirdly, I'd still say more positives than negatives.
Any positives for you, Eric, to build on what Jez said?
I think the Kante thing is certainly interesting. I think that, again, if we Tolisso has played as a sole holding midfielder at times with Lyon. It did not go well. Again, this was 2015-16, I think. Gonalon was suspended for a handful of matches or injured. I can't, or maybe dropped. But Tolisso, that somewhat scares me, the thought of him as a holding midfielder. But that being said, if what we're looking for is a more complex approach in attack, that today a lot of what France relied upon with that front three was balls over the top. Griezmann wasn't quite getting to them. It was a little frustrating. But if you can have more play linked on the ground, and I think that Conte would be better used further forward to facilitate that, particularly if you did end up having he and Fekir on the pitch at the same time. And I think that that's certainly a positive. I also want to mention again, these young fullbacks, and a young defensive line too. I think Varane's 25 and GT's 24. I mean, we're looking at a very, very young defense, and again, GT's handball, yes, frustrating, but playing a very composed match. And Lloris, again, I know, this is a player that we've been watching for, close to a decade now, since he came through at Nice and since he blossomed at Lyon. And I think that, again, there's always been some slight questions about him, but on his day, he can be an incredible reflex keeper, and I think he proved that, particularly with that save from the own goal in the first half. And I think it's really good to see him deliver a performance like that when it counts. And I think that, I think you mentioned there's some discussion on the FFW pod, Rich, with you and Rich, Jez, talking about how Areola might even be the best option at this point. And the fact that that was even debated and made me have food for thought was just an indication of how badly Lloris seemed to be struggling. So to see him as the captain rebound from a rather rickety set of friendlies to deliver a really strong performance, I think could be a really, really good boost for France, especially if they can take that sort of confidence into the knockout rounds where they're going to need it against, a fellow contenders.
Indeed. Top stuff. One thing before we finish, chaps, is VAR, the penalty decision. How do we see it? Do we think penalty? Because I was a little bit bemused by the debate, Jez, in watching the British coverage. I kind of felt that it was the right decision in the end. What do you think? For the penalty, for the first penalty, for Griezmann's penalty.
I think it was the right decision, but if it had gone against France, I think I'd have been fuming. I'll be completely honest. I don't know the exact rules. I don't know if it's supposed to be, if there's sort of thing like rugby or cricket where it's got to be absolutely clear cut in order to reverse the referee's original decision. To me, it wasn't 100% clear cut. I think, I'm not sure. I want to say it was definitely a penalty, but I'm slightly uncomfortable with saying that. And I'm just thinking, if the shoe had been on the other foot, I think I'd have been pretty angry. But the fact that there's any doubt at all shows that it's certainly not the worst decision in the world.
Eric, would you agree?
Yeah, I think the use of VAR, it was used again in the match that just finished, the Denmark-Peru match, and it seems like the officials have a good handle on it, and they're using it to the benefit of the game. And decisions are taking 30, 45 seconds.
So definitely the way it worked, I think, was excellent. No issues with that at all. And
that's what we want. That's what the doubts are. If it allows that level of accuracy, and again, as you both say, not necessarily a stonewall penalty, but certainly more than enough there to, as you rightly say, Jez, to say, if were that not called, I would be irate. So yeah, I think, again, job done for VAR so far in this tournament. That may change in a higher pressure situation in the knockout rounds, but I think that these officials, I think they had these officials who hadn't worked with this system, this technology before this, have acquitted themselves really well so far in what I've seen in this tournament.
And anything that annoys Mark Lawrenson is good to know.
Absolutely. Well, that's literally anything, though, isn't it, that annoys Mark Lawrenson?
Yeah, that's true.
Brilliant stuff. I have to just to round off. I have to say I agree with Eric there about the VAR. It's actually been surprisingly sort of under the radar a little bit. It hasn't been dominating. It hasn't been long decisions. There hasn't been any bizarre decisions. I felt for the French penalty that, given that I'm not sure the defender got the ball, and even if he did, Griezmann was still in control of the ball. And as he sort of went past the ball wasn't running out of play necessarily. You think Griezmann's going to get there. He doesn't go down before he's touched, and then his back heel is clipped and he falls. To me, it looked like a penalty, but interesting to debate it nonetheless. So
I think for me, it was just I think he did get a touch, just a touch on the ball. And actually, for me, the crucial thing maybe was I thought that the ball had run away from Griezmann. But there you go. The fact that we disagree with that shows that there's enough doubt that it's not an unreasonable decision at all to give it.
Yeah, it's interesting how the VAR doesn't really solve many debates. It sort of just gives an extra layer that we can discuss over whether the minutiae of things are right or things are wrong. It's still shades of grey. Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, Jez, carry on.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Well, what a good way to end. Fantastic stuff. So keep an eye out for further podcasts from GFFN on the World Cup as France progress. Remember to check out at GFFN on Twitter for all the latest news for over the French progress in the World Cup, and some fantastic insight on summer transfer window and all the latest goings on in French football, as well as, of course, getfootballnewsfrance.com for opinion pieces and the more of me and Eric and Jez and the rest of the GFFN team. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to Eric and Jez, and enjoy the Croatia-Nigeria game, and we'll see you soon.